Okay. A couple of people suggested that I explain the title, just for those who didn't catch it. Some people didn't like it as much as I did, but it is a reference to Bill Clinton's realization as he was campaigning once, right? And he said, "It's the economy, stupid." We did a little bit of translation, but it's not directed at anyone in the room or outside the room. Okay. I once got good advice, which is whenever you hear anyone talk about the Torah's approach to big topics like politics, economics, etc., so take what follows with a large grain of salt, because the Torah specifically, and religion more broadly, is something that has a lot of power and is easily manipulated to whatever your point of view is, and very often you can find enough supporting evidence to basically take it wherever you want to go. This is something that's been a little bit in the headlines of late in the Jewish world. As Yeshiva University brought in a very partisan speaker, and this goes on all the time. And therefore, I would advise you, take what follows with a grain of salt. But at least what we might be able to do is put together a formulation, or at least a way of thinking about economic issues within, from a Torah perspective. Starting because there's just, even as we approach the subject, the place to look is a little bit counterintuitive. When I think of economics and I think of money, this is something that my students all know they have to know for every test. So where do we look for the laws of business and the laws of money? We know that we look in, if we're talking about the Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, then when we look in Seder Nezikin, if we're looking in the Shulchan Aruch, then we look in Choshen Mishpat. And if we look there, we'll find lots of laws about business and money, and a focus on integrity and honesty, and really complex laws. For an unrelated project, I spent the weekend researching what the Torah's approach is to life insurance, and there's not life insurance, I'm sorry, to insurance of items, whether or not it's a side bet, which would allow double dipping, and just this, there's a very, very rich and complex business literature, but I think that's probably not where we're going to want to be looking when we're looking for economic theory more broadly. Because it's important to remember that this was a largely agricultural society that the Torah was dealing with, and therefore, in terms of understanding what the Torah has to say about economics, more generally, we might be looking more towards Seder Zraim than Seder Nezikin. But let's take just a step back before we get back to the Torah. At the extreme, certainly, let's say in this century or last century, there were two extreme, very different economic approaches that were tried in the world that were competing against each other. On the one hand, you had probably most typified by the United States, the capitalist vision, and on the other hand, you had the Soviet Union, which had pockets of an infant Israel that were pushing more of a communist or socialist vision, where you had communal ownership over the properties. The kibbutz was probably as good a laboratory for these experiments as any larger government was. So, and what emerged the lessons that seem to have emerged from all the various experiments are that both models have advantages, but serious disadvantages as well. These days there are very, very few strict socialist economic models out there, for the most part because they don't seem to last or work. And even the capitalist visions, even America's capitalist is especially post-New Deal, what some might call more of a compassionate conservatism because of the pitfalls of a strict capitalist society. Just so that we spell it out, what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of each approach? Do we, on a deal like this, is it like the Omiyun? Do we do participation? Yeah?
Capitalist system, you get accumulation of the wealth in certain segments that just grows. You get more of a separation.
Right. So capitalism has the haves do very well, the have-nots do very poorly, and you have this polarization of the economic stature of the winners and losers, which might work well for the winners, but you have people who really just don't make it in a strict capitalist society.
So if you have excess wealth redistribution, or everybody can pay the same, there's no motivation to do one job versus another, or to do it well.
On the flip side, when you have a complete sharing of wealth, it sucks all the motivation to success, to innovate, to succeed, to innovate, to work hard out of it, because I'm getting my same little pile as the person who is not working as hard or is not succeeding as much as I am, and therefore, why bother? Those are two of the big ones. I would just add on each side that there's probably another one as well. Additionally, I think a big problem with the communal vision is that it was very subject to corruption, always, right? Because someone has to be pulling the levers. So there was always corruption, but I think the dominant one is what you pointed out, is the lack of motivation to push. Now, at the beginnings, this is you can usually get past this because you have idealism in the broader structure, whether it's the kibbutz, so whatever it is, people are on fire and motivated by the philosophy, but a generation or 2 generations later, that idealism has a tendency not to last, and then people start looking to see what they can get for it. On the other, yeah, please.
Just to piggyback on what someone said about capitalism, it's never a level playing field, so by definition, it's never fair, because capitalist societies are never grown out of a level playing field, and often losers lose on the backs of the winners. So I just want to add that to the piece.
Great. So on the one hand, it's not just that you have the winners and losers that the free market has that number, but also there is a lack of fairness that things can never be the same, right? In other words, especially, again, once you get a generation or 2 past the starting point in the game, and you have some people who are, imagine we're playing a Monopoly game, where instead of the game ending when someone goes bankrupt, you just keep playing and you pass your pieces and your properties on to your kids. So then, obviously, we're starting in very different positions. I would say religiously, I think that you're both right, are the key problems with capitalism, which most capitalist societies, Europe to an extreme, America less so, have tempered with the welfare state to help those who aren't making it, to make sure that there is a floor, as opposed to in modern day America, there is extreme poverty without question, but it probably is not the same poverty that our grandparents and great-grandparents either experienced or saw around them. There are floors where if someone is well enough to look out for their own self-interest, that there is availability for help for those who really need it by the broader governmental structure. Okay. Additionally, I think religiously the problem that capitalism breeds is not just for those who lose at the free market game, but also for those who win, that there is this right? Those who, if we do well societally, so then that's fine. So we were bought into the system, and it's a good system, and everyone is succeeding. If I am very wealthy and successful, so then it's very, very easy for me to view that as, wow, look at me, aren't I great? And forget who really took care of us, that God is the one who is, to whatever extent, either pulling the strings or giving me the support that I need and the good health and environment that I need in order to succeed, which is problematic as well.
Or just the opposite.
Or just the
Or
opposite.
just the opposite. You could say, wow, I'm so successful and I did so well. God's been so good to me. I have such a character to God. I'm going to get stucker and I'm going to go.
We can, but there's a risk that we're not always going to get it right? That would be the ideal. Human beings are frail and flawed, and we have a tendency not to always get exactly the right answer. So let's take a look between these extremes and see where the Torah seems to fall out on some of these questions. So, pretty clearly, what's our baseline? Are we starting with a baseline of a communist structure or a capitalist structure? The Torah clearly has, if you look back in Chosh and Mishpat, the Torah has private ownership. The Torah has a basic free market, again, with significant regulation. You're limited in the amount of profit that you can charge on any item. You can't even charge interest. There are definitely regulations, but we're starting with a free market. But I think in order to get as we mentioned, to get a bigger picture, we want to look a little bit at the economic life of the Israeli farmer. Now, just those two words, Israeli farmer, show us how far we have come from the Torah's vision, and that's going to present a religious challenge to us to try to capture what the Torah's economic message is, when so little of the practical life that it bred is relevant to us. But let's at least see what it looks like in the ideal. So you go, you harvest your crop, you have 100 units of crop. The first thing you do is you give Truma Gdola, you give a very small percentage to your Kohen, and that's done basically every year. When we say years 1 through 6, why are we saying 1 through 6? 1 through 6 basically means every year, because in Shmita, you don't give anything because you don't have anything. We'll get back to Shmita momentarily. After that 2%, you give 10%, or 10% of what's left, so we're talking about 9.8% of your original haul. That's given to the Levi, and again, that's given in years 1 through 6. After that, there's a split, right? In years 1, 2, 4, and 5, you then give another 10% of what's left, and that you don't give it to anybody. You set that aside for yourself. That becomes your Ma'aser Sheni. Ma'aser Sheni is you get to hold on yourself. You just have to eat it in Yerushalayim. Now, let's say you're not going to Yerushalayim anytime soon, and the food won't last until you get there. So the Torah describes you can be podeh the food. You take the sanctity of Maser Sheni, you put it onto money, and then you take the money, spend it in Yerushalayim, and spend it on food items that you then go and eat in Yerushalayim. When you get there, they have to go visit Yerushalayim pretty regularly anyway, 3 times a year, so we weren't pushing it off that long. And finally, in years 3 and 6, so instead of Ma'aser Sheni, we have Ma'aser Ani. You give 10% to the poor. My students were always trying to memorize this. This chart is common knowledge. I hope it's common knowledge. At least it is by a certain fraction of Mayano graduates. So it's not 1, 2, 4, 5, right? There are 2 3-year cycles over here. So it's 1 and 2 Maser Sheni, 3 Maser Ani, 4, 5 Maser Sheni, 6 Maser Ani. Fine, good. Now, the Kohen and the Ani both seem to be getting the short end of the stick. Don't feel so bad for them, right? The Kohen gets 23 other matanot, many of which are related to their work in the Beit HaMikdash. And the poor, in addition, even though they're missing out, they're only getting this Maaser Ani 2 out of every 7 years. There are many, many other mitzvot. As we bring down the psukim over here, you have, we do, over there in source 5, so you have leket and shikha and peah, where peah, an entire corner of every field has to be left open to the poor, that if stalks while you're harvesting fall, if it's 1 or 2 stalks, you have to leave it for the poor. And if you miss a row, you can't go back and get it. You have to leave that for the poor. There's a mitzvah of tzedakah, just broadly, that we're obligated to give tzedakah. As we mentioned, there's a universal free loan society that everyone has both a prohibition against collecting interest and a positive commandment to lend money to someone who needs it. Right? If we didn't have B, A wouldn't be that helpful, right? But without interest, the motivating factor for lenders is gone, but it certainly helps in economic theory when you have God to come in and, I guess, be the real invisible hand in economic movement, where Hashem says, you must lend money anyway if you're in a position to do so. So what we basically have here, so what are we trying to accomplish over here? So I think a lot of this, let's start with Truma and Maser and the Matnos Kuhuna and Leviah generally. So these are the civil servants of the Jewish world. I don't think we assign it anymore, but there was once a class that used to assign a novel written by Gideon Rothstein called Murder in the Mikdash. And it was a murder mystery, kind of similar to other murder mysteries you might read in terms of plot line. But what was unique about it is that it took place in post-Messianic Israel. And it really gave you a modern-day feel for what that might look like. And one of the things that are striking is that you have this priestly class that really were the civil servants. They were out there to serve us. Now, how do you ensure that they don't just go to law school? So that's not what was going on, right? In other words, people, for the most people, were working their fields, and therefore, if Shevet Levi doesn't get land, so then they're driven towards the civil service that we desire from them. So if we have 11 tribes giving 10% to this one tribe, you have Shevet Levi getting approximately 110% of any other tribe. And not everybody was a farmer, but just most people were. So you have Shevet Levi about breaking even for their public service. Now, which Levi and which Kohen do you need to give your Truma or your Maaser to? So the answer is whoever you want. You get to choose. At first thought, I always assumed that seems awfully unfair, right? In other words, the charismatic, good-looking Levi is going to clean up, and the rest of us are going to be sitting there on street corners, begging for a spare change. But I think it works in the other direction, right? What's that going to motivate the Levium to do? So number one, it's going to motivate them to be the best public servants that they can be, to try and earn that trust. Number two, as opposed to, let's say, Chabad, right? How do Lubavitchers know where they should go and set up their Chabad house? So there's a central bureaucracy that tells them, you go to Albania, and you go to Georgia, and everyone's going somewhere. What we've done over here is cut out that bureaucratic middleman. Instead of having us pay taxes to the city of Teaneck and the state of New Jersey in the United States of America, who then give it to the the firemen and the police force and the public school teachers, you give it directly. Now, where as a Levi am I going to go and live? Well, if we all go to New York and LA and Eilat, so then we're all going to be fighting against each other for the same resources, for the same 10%. And what that's going to motivate some of us to do is head out to Montana, etc., which is exactly what we want. We want, if no one is out there pulling these strings and making sure that we have the right ratio of Levium to non-Levium and Kohanim to non-Kohanim, the market, by doing it like this, we have, the market kind of takes care of itself and makes sure that they chase where they can make a living. Yeah.
But it could also lead to corruption.
And what, how,
For
I mean,
favoritism, because you're relying on, this is supposed to be something holy, it's not supposed to be something that's relying on who's paying you and what you're gonna answer them and how you're gonna act in a certain way. I think it can lead to corruption.
it can lead.
I was very surprised the first time I learned that the Kohanim were chosen in popularity.
There was corruption.
There certainly was, and I'll tell you, I mean,
Yeah, so-
spoiler
it leads
alert,
to
I will tell you
corruption.
that Murder in the Mikdash is built on the corruption of the priestly
No, but
class.
this does, I mean,
I guess, I'm not sure it's more subject to corruption than anything else. In other words, everything is very above board. We know exactly what the system is.
yeah, but they're supposed to be representing the Kohanim's Shemnitz.
Absolutely. So
Different.
therefore,
I mean, I'm not saying it's different that we should be in business, I'm not saying
Look,
that we're not supposed
in
to
other
be
words,
only, but this is a whole representation.
in the extreme,
to make
right?
it into,
what would that look like? What would the corruption look like? I guess I am a Levi. I let it be known under the table that you give me your maser and I'll give you 2% back. Something to that extent. I get. So that would be pretty bad.
or give them, or be right.
Okay, so that would be
Maybe
pretty
extra word
bad.
for you
Exactly.
in the
Exactly.
no, whatever they do, I don't know.
Yes,
Okay.
I don't think it's
Okay.
the right.
I'm sure.
Okay, I hear. Yes.
Just with all due
Zen.
respect, the rabbinic structure
Right.
today almost works the same way. You could be a brilliant Talmud Chacham, and you could have, and have a great personality, and now being incredibly personable, and therefore not get a pulpit, and then you could be poor forever. You could have a great, great, great personality, and everybody loves you, and then you are the rabbi of a great shul. I mean, and then you have salary. So we treat our rabbanim, almost in a similar sense, where you have
Yeah.
a great personality, you succeed. If you
I hear-
don't, you can be brilliant and you don't succeed.
I mean, unfortunately, it's somewhat
I don't think it's always
non-deal.
like that. I think there's writing, there's different avenues for people, just like in business, you have different avenues that your personality figures to. So it's like in
You
anything.
still- you
Yeah.
still have to
One of my
have-
favorite persons
Everybody's
was
meant
not
to
a
be
pulpit rabbi, that I used to buy his books and tell everybody at the table how great a teacher he was for my children.
He probably has connections due to publish those books because of his
No,
personality.
he's brilliant and he's
Yeah.
an unbelievable person.
I think I think your point
No, but this is
is
supposed to be-
is very well. I think your point is well
Different
taken.
than a rabbi nowadays, I think.
Yeah, I think your point is well taken. And is there a possibility with heavy regulation to be able to combat some of the potential for abuse that you're describing?
Yeah.
Possibly, but that comes along with its own set of. Everything has a peckle.
Right.
So
Exactly.
I think there's. I think for something that requires so little intervention from the top or the outside, I think you would have to work. You would have to be really corrupt in order to corrupt. And once again, the invisible hand of don't be a bad guy and don't steal and don't lie and is also playing its role here. We're not assuming every Jew has what we call cheskat kashrut, right? We just assume that people are going to do the right thing. I mean, trust and verify, and therefore we have a legal structure to go and investigate when it's necessary. But we're not building our systems. I think for the most part, we don't build our systems around the criminal minority. I think we build it around good faith people who are trying to get it right, and then we adjust when there are problems within that system. But I think those are definitely vulnerabilities. Fair enough. Yeah.
So, if a lady
No, I don't think so. I think the Kohanim also were
They
weren't
did.
dispersed.
So the community bought this person a house?
No, so when the original land of Israel was divided, there were these Arei Leviah, right? In other words, each tribe got vast sections of land, and within each of those sections, there were these Arei Leviah, where the Levium had that was their home base.
Yeah, I always thought it was like one spot, I never realized that there was a section.
Yeah, it's a very interesting setup, and there's a lot of detail in the Psukim about what these are, how they're meant to be set up, which is, I guess, a rich area for exploration that I haven't yet done.
What was the reasoning that Levium got so much more than the Kohanim?
So I think the Kohanim got other stuff, got a lot more other
That's
stuff
why they got other stuff.
that supplements this 2%. Okay, just quickly, Maaser Sheni, right? What's the point of Maaser Sheni if it's not going to anybody else? So perhaps what you're doing then is, in such a agricultural, rich economic society, when you have your capital, which is not going to be agricultural, that's going to be your urban metropolis. So what Maaser Sheni does is it guarantees an infusion of economic activity regularly. There's 10%, 4 out of every 67% of the time, there's 10% of everybody's cash flow that they need to go and bring. I remember after 9/11, when everyone just wanted to do something, and there was that great moment of potential where they could have set up a Shirut Le'umi or a mandatory Peace Corps service or whatever it would be in America. They could have said, everyone wanted to contribute. And I remember Mayor Giuliani saying, you know what you can do? It was the classic American response. Go to New York, spend money. And we were all so pleased, okay, if you insist, I'll go out to eat and I'll see a show, and right? So, but for the most part, that is what capital cities need. So Maaser Sheni ensures this kind of economic activity.
But
Yeah.
it also ensures the development of an integrated society, because you are required to interact with the person that you are required to give to. You're required to see the poor guy, you're required to see the Kohen, the Levi is required. This is society.
That's beautiful. I didn't think about that. That's excellent. And Maaser Sheni in particular, just the whole idea of Aliyah L'Regel generally, that we have to all converge on Yerushalayim for the Chagim, and the mitzvah of Hakel once every 7 years, that everybody has to be there at the exact same moment to hear the king. We're ensuring, just to bring up Lubavitch one more time, I know that I just saw that in the headlines that they have their annual convention where everyone comes in from all over the world, and you're basically ensuring that as large as the Jewish world gets, that we still have this periodic social interaction with people who we don't necessarily have that much in common with. On the one hand, we know that the ideal of tzedakah is to keep it anonymous and to keep it to maintain the dignity of the receiver. On the other hand, I think you're pointing out correctly that this ensures a certain amount, and a lot of this doesn't even feel like tzedakah, right? This is just
It's like taxes.
It's like taxes, but instead of giving it to a faceless IRS after going through countless forms, so you have this FaceTime. Very nice, thank you. Okay, so let's get to Shmita and Yovel for a moment. Let's review some of the laws that we know about Shmita and Yovel. So Shmita is every 7th year, if we look at the sources, right? Every 7th year we have Shmita. Now we are in number 6, A, B, and C. So it introduces the idea of Shmita. So most of the rules are agricultural. So you can't work your field, can't harvest what grows by its, well, you can harvest it, but not for yourself because it doesn't belong to me anymore. Last year I spent in Israel, and we caught the tail end of Shmita, including a significant portion of it, especially for fruits. And in our neighborhood, everybody had trees, and there was just on the Yahoo group that everyone would say, okay, my lemons are ripe, and it's Shmita, so just come on, come all. It's not my lemons, right? Everything belongs to everyone. So we have this mandated sabbatical every 7th year, so no one is working, and everyone owns everything equally, which is a remarkable demand, right? We don't really have time to get into it now, but the fact that Israel has to come up, in these days, has to come up with all of these very imperfect solutions to what has become the problem of Shmita, whether that's heter machira for one community, or bringing in goods from chutz la'aretz, which is a whole, for everyone, those two are both the best and the worst option. Some people view heter machira as best and outside of Israel goods as the worst, and some people have the reverse. And it really is challenging. There's a really wonderful essay that if you get a chance to look at, when Rav Lichtenstein describes his thought process when deciding whether or not the yeshiva should rely on heter machira or not. And he really gets at a lot of these, the issues that we're describing, but you feel his pain. Even more than what his ultimate conclusion ends up being, you feel his pain at how little is left of the ideal of Shmita as spelled out by the Torah. The Torah tells us, if you look in source 6b over here, what are we going to eat when you say, what are we going to eat in that 7th year? We didn't plant anything. We didn't work the fields at all. And Hashem says, I quoted the wrong pasuk, sorry about that. But Hashem says, I know, I got this, right? Don't worry about it. I'm going to take care of you. But in any event, let's look at Shmita in the ideal rather than Shmita in the real as we face it, Bizman Hazeh. So in addition to the agricultural rules, you also have one other non-agricultural rule, which is the forgiveness of debt. That any loans that have been taken out are all of a sudden just magically wiped off the books. Right? If I borrowed $100 going into Shmita, there's a machloka, whether it's the beginning of the year or the end of the year, but whatever that magic moment is of Shmita, once the debt crosses that moment in time, it's gone, and that's it. And again, this seems like an incredibly high standard of, well, if I wanted to give a gift, I would have given a gift. I gave a loan because I want my money back. And Hashem says, well, I know, and do it anyway, right? And don't say, I'm going to, Shemitah's coming, I better stop lending money, right? That's what led to the creation of Pruzbul, is that we got it wrong. We did exactly the opposite of what the pasuk says. Hashem tells us in the pasuk, I know the problems, I'm aware, do it anyway, right? So what we see in Shmita is, let's just put all this together, right? Communal ownership over all property, no one working. What we see is in this, what in a general system is this capitalist system, the free market, with a very significant leket, shikha, tzedakah, maaser ani, a very significant welfare state to ensure that the have-nots are not totally forgotten, are not completely lost. You have this injection once every 7 years of a communist year, right? Which is essentially what Shmita is. None of us we're all equal in every way. We all wake up and we're not going to work, right? We're all going to Daf Yomi Shir or Lazy Bean or whatever's going on. We're all in it together, and my field is your field. And once every 7 years, there's enough motivation in the other 6 years to spur innovation and to guarantee that we push to accomplish as much as we can. But once every 7 years, we need to, I don't know if it's even the playing field, but certainly bring them closer together and remind ourselves that we're all the same. And remind the rich, hey, wait a minute, this is not me who did all this. And remind the poor that they have a shot and give them a chance going into year number 8 or year number 1 of the next cycle, that they're caught up to a certain extent. And to whatever extent you're falling behind and you're in debt, so again, we even that playing field. I'm no longer in debt to you. I don't owe you in that way. It's not that you're winning the game and I'm losing the game, and therefore we have this power differential. Not for that year, but that's temporary. If you look at Yovel adds 2 more rules, right? The 2 extra rules that are added are, number 1, all lands go back to their original owner. In other words, in Jewish law, there's no such thing as a fee simple sale of land. All you can have is at most a long-term lease, depending on when you make your purchase, right? If you make your purchase at the beginning of a Yovel cycle, so then you can have up close to 50 years of your lease. If you buy it at the end of your Yovel cycle, so then you're going to have a very short lease agreement. Additionally, all slaves go free. And what Yovel seems to be is Shmita, the way that we've been talking about it, on steroids, right? It's just this super Shmita where you have all the regular rules of Shmita. So you have a double Shmita year. Year 49 is a Shmita year. Year 50 is a Shmita year, plus all the people who are really losing the game. What does that mean that you're really losing the game? That you had to sell your ancestral field. That you had to sell yourself as a slave. If once a generation, you get a do-over. You get to start again from scratch. So I think to a certain extent, again, buy it, don't buy it, many grains of salt, please feel free. But what seems to be emerging is a recognition of the flaws in any pure system and built-in guards against those dangers. What I think becomes our real challenge in today's world, where so much of this is just not on our radar screen at all. In this past Shmita cycle, I don't know if it had been there 7 years prior, there was an organization collecting money for farmers who don't rely on heter mechira. So what the pitch of this Stucco organization was, the entire mitzvah of Shmita is on the backs of very, very few people. So how are we going to fix it? Let's collect money so that we all share in the pain and the schus of this mitzvah, if not equally, at least somewhat. But that's just a reminder. Oh yeah, it's Shmita, right? Now in Israel, we had more of it just because shopping was a pain in the neck. And there was something beautiful about the Pach Shmita, and you feel it a little bit, but we don't feel it in our pocketbooks. We don't feel it in terms of our social interactions with others. None of this is really there, and it becomes a challenge to us. On the one hand, obviously, life is a lot less challenging, that we're not dependent on the rainfall in such a practical, day-to-day, paycheck-to-paycheck way, determined by the weather. We live much more comfortable, less challenging lives than the system was set out for. But that kind of physical comfort yields a religious challenge that we then have to go and work a lot harder to try and get at whatever values we find, whether it's these or whatever your own exploration, wherever that takes you, to try and get at those important values of feeling empathy for our neighbors, sharing in their struggles, reminding ourselves that, imagine if every 7th year we just didn't go to work for it's a different world. So how can we try to get at those ideals that the Torah is mandating for us? So how can we buy in? We see a model, right? In other words, these days, none of us take maaser out. Maaser ksafim has taking 10% of our income and giving that to tzedakah. To whatever extent it is a mitzvah, is not an actual mitzvah, it's d'oraita, it's d'rabbanan, there are certainly models for it. It certainly has taken amplified significance in our new economic world. How can we go using that as a potential model and try to bring some of these ideals to life for us is something that I think is worth thinking about. Yasher koach to all of you for coming. This is really impressive that this is how you spend your free time. Thank you. Yeah.
No, I'm just wondering, so in the time of the Torah, and I don't know if this was they
Right.
lived this way kind of pure, like unbridled, or were there, like how did it go? Like Shmita and all that back then? I don't know, maybe I'm like being ignorant in this question, but.
No, I don't think so. And I'm not sure.
I mean,
I don't know the answer.
I just wonder how it went.
I don't know what kind of records we have.
Did it go well? What would you imagine?
I would imagine a mix. I would imagine a mix.
Yes, yeah, mix, yeah.
Sometimes better than others, but it probably was somewhat challenging. But
Right.
I mean, on the other hand, if you had the mass wealth, I think there was a significant amount of, this is not my area, but I think there's a significant amount of vegetation that would just continue to be there, and if it's open to everyone, and all these rules are highly regulated in terms of what can I go and take, and when can I take for myself, and when do I have to leave for others, etc. So there is a lot of regulation. It's all thought through. Is there enough for society in total? I don't know. My guess is probably sometimes yes, sometimes no. I think it was probably a challenging mitzvah.
The second session should be
it's
wrapping
worth
up
thinking
now.
about.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Have a good day.
Thanks.